All right, thanks for joining, everybody. Appreciate it. This is Dan Lyons at the National Weather Service in Raleigh. We're going to go ahead and talk about the weather over the next 7 days across central North Carolina, covering the period September 5th through September 11th. Let's take a look at the big picture of what's going on, at least for the next couple days. Not much going on out there at the moment. There are some clouds out there. There may even be a sprinkle or two, depending on where you're at. But bottom line, really not much going on weather-wise today. That will be the case tomorrow as well. We are going to see an area of low pressure move up the coast on Saturday, and that will bring a chance of rain. That'll probably be the best chance of rain that we have this entire week coming up with the system that's coming up the coast on Saturday. So we do have some rain chances primarily east of US 1 on Saturday as low pressure moves through the area. However, there is a real slight chance. It's not 0%. It's not a very high chance, but there is a very slight chance, maybe a 10 to 20% chance where we see some thunderstorms that develop across the area as a cold front moves through the area. If you look at that Saturday map, you see we have that low that's across southeastern North Carolina, and then we have that blue cold front that's crossing the mountains. The low pressure moving off the coast should not be much of a weather player aside from some real light rain. But when that cold front comes across the area, that's where we could see a little bit of shower and thunderstorm activity. Not severe. I'll talk about that in a little while. But bottom line, once that gets out of here, once we get to Sunday, Monday, and even into the middle of next week, you see that big area of high pressure that's centered across the eastern U.S. That's going to be our driver for much of next week. Dry weather, much lower dew points. It's going to feel, quite cool, quite dry, quite refreshing once we get that area of high pressure that moves into the area. So bottom line, a relatively quiet week across North Carolina. Now let's bump ahead here to the chance for severe thunderstorm potential. You don't see anything highlighted on this map whatsoever with the exception of Saturday. And the only reason that Saturday is highlighted is that is an indication that, hey, maybe there could be a stray rumble or two of thunder when that cold front crosses the mountains and moves into central North Carolina. We'll see how many thunderstorms we actually get, but if we do get anything, not expecting any sort of severe weather with that front when it moves through. And then of course it dries out after that. That's why you don't see anything on the map for Sunday through Thursday. Should be relatively quiet for sure in terms of severe weather. Let's talk about rainfall here. So these maps, none of these are lit up particularly much today. Really nothing across the area. That's why I said maybe there's a sprinkle or two out there at worst. Really not much going on in terms of heavy rainfall at all. The rainfall that you see on the map for Friday would be late Friday at best. So, and again, those totals that you see on there, that's that first shade of green, maybe the second shade of green if you're southeast of Fayetteville, down closer to Wilmington. But again, those totals are really light, 1/10 of an inch or so. Pretty similar totals on Saturday, if not even a little bit less, maybe 1/100th to 1/10 of an inch. That's really not going to amount to much at all. And then of course, Sunday, Monday, completely dry across the area. And then if we do a 5-day total, boy, some spots, out in the Triad, Greensboro, Winston-Salem, High Point, you may not see any rain really whatsoever for at least the next 5 days, if not the next 7 or 8. So no real major precip totals here whatsoever. And consequently, as you might imagine, there's no real threat for excessive rainfall today, tomorrow, Saturday. And certainly I already told you there's no rain on Sunday, Monday, so there's no excessive rainfall threat across the area on those days either. So again, the whole theme here of a quiet week ahead seems to be ringing true. Unfortunately, though, with that lack of rainfall, we had all that rain from the remnants of Tropical Storm Debbie back in early August, and we've had some on and off rain. We had some decent rain last Friday and last Sunday night. That has certainly kept the majority of the state drought free, but there is a small area of drought lingering across the far southwestern part of the state in that tan shading coloring over there. And the western part of the state didn't do so hot with that rain that we got last week. So you see the area of yellow, the abnormally dry, has actually expanded a little bit across the mountains of western North Carolina. So, unfortunately, it does not look like things are going to improve really anywhere in the state, especially across the western part of the state. We're just not looking at a lot of rainfall. So we'll see how this drought outlook changes next week. Certainly the good news is the overwhelming majority of the state is drought free, but there are still some areas across the west that are hanging on to some drought. So we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens next week. Let's talk about the tropics, and let's hang out on this slide for a minute or two because there's a lot going on this slide. So if you look at this at first glance, it's kind of alarming because you've got 5 different areas that the Hurricane Center is currently monitoring for potential development over the course of the next week. Now, before we dive into this too much, all of these currently have a low probability of development. So none of these are any greater than 40%. And honestly, most of these are maybe a 10 to 20% chance of development. The good news here for North Carolina is that none of these pose an imminent threat to the state. So yes, it's active out there, or at least the potential is there for it to become active over the course of the next week. But the good news is there's no imminent threat to North Carolina. If you remember back to some of those initial maps that I showed you with that big area of high pressure moving into the area, that would tend to suppress anything that does develop and keep it well to our south. So that's why we can say there's no threat to North Carolina at this time. But given how busy this graphic is, and given how climatologically we usually see the peak of hurricane activity usually occur during the 1st to 2nd week of September, it is a good reminder that we still have a long way to go, right? It's been very quiet as of late. Hurricane outlooks have been talking about it's going to be a very busy year, and there's still plenty of season to go. So it's certainly not an instance where you want to let your guard down. We still have a lot of hurricane season ahead of us here before we're finally out of it by the end of November. Let's talk about some longer range stuff, temps and precipitation chances. No real clear signal in terms of temperatures in the week 2 period. Pretty much equal chances across the board for below normal, near normal, or above normal temperatures across North Carolina. There's a slight tendency, or a slight indication of above normal temps, like out past the triad. So maybe for Forsyth County at best. But generally speaking, across the Carolinas, equal chances for above, near, or below normal temperatures. And then when we look at precip chances, there's a pretty good signal for maybe a 33 to 40 or 40 to 50% chance, depending on where you're looking. Tendency for above normal precip by the time we get into the week 2 period. We should have some increased precip chances late next week in the areas that you see in green there. So that's what the Climate Prediction Center is looking at to draw those probabilities in. But really up until then, it's going to be awfully dry. No real precip chances to speak of outside of that event, that low pressure on Saturday. Let's talk about graphical hazards dashboard here. Nothing lit up with the exception of one period on Saturday, and that's for lightning. And that is for that very outside, slight, limited, whatever qualifier you want to use, a real low chance of thunderstorms with that cold front when it moves through during the day into the evening on Saturday. It's a really low chance, but let's at least throw it on there just for folks to be aware. It's Saturday, events are going on outside, so something to be aware of. Again, the chances are low, but it's not zero. Other than that, the dashboard is clean with no threats. Again, the theme of quiet weather lives on as we go through all these slides here. So let's wrap it up here. Again, a relatively quiet week ahead. We do have some rain chances mainly east of US 1 with an area of low pressure that's going to slowly move up the coast during the day Saturday. That's not going to be too much of a weather maker. Could see an isolated thunderstorm with a cold front that follows that low Saturday afternoon, Saturday evening. But outside of that, dry. You see the forecast on the bottom. By the time we get to Sunday, we've dried back out. By the time we get to Monday, still dry. Look at those low temperatures. Yes, they're going to start out in the mid 60s, maybe upper 60s Friday night. But by the time we get to Saturday night, Sunday night, we'll be looking at lows in the low to mid 50s, which will certainly feel quite nice for those who are big fans of fall.